Hi viewers, and welcome to the channel, and welcome to the Understanding FreeCAD series. We're on lesson 3 where we're building and animating the piston head and crankshaft assembly. We're going to be looking at animating that now. Now this course is split over 4 videos. The first one where we create the piston head with a master sketch. The second one where we create a crankshaft and connecting rod. And the third one we actually start building the assembly. We're on lesson 4, which is more of an intermediate/advanced video, but you can skip this one if you so desire and move on to the other lessons. Within this video we're going to learn how to animate the object and learn how to script the animation using a Python macro. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to the site. I also have a Ko-Fi or a coffee site that you can donate to if you so desire, and that's at ko-fi.com/MANG0. I also run a Patreon where you can subscribe and get extra content, and that's at www.patreon.com/MangoJellySolutions. Any money that's kindly donated will be used to expand the channel. Now we've got the piston head aligned correctly, we're going to look at creating rotation in this. Now, as I said before, we've got these points here and here, and we're going to look at using these to rotate this piston to make this head go up and down and allow us to animate this via script. Now at the moment we've got this fixed position here. If we look over to the left, this fixed position is false, so it must be the other one. It's this one here, fixed position of true. And if we look at this, what we have is a piston head at full height, and we need to create some kind of constraint with the fixed circle and this crankshaft. Now if we look along here, we've got this edge here, and also we've got an edge on this cylinder. These are 2 cylinders, so they will both have an edge. If we rotate the cylinder, go up to the move tool and just rotate that like so, that edge, as you can see it there, is rotating. So you can see that edge rotating. And that's what we'll use, because we'll fix that edge to this edge here and make an axis constraint against those. So at the moment, if I hit solve, then this won't solve. The minute I connect this edge with this edge, like so, because this is a fixed position, so you can see the fixed position is true. Let's bring this out a bit. There we go, fixed position true. So we take this edge here and this edge, and we'll create a constraint against them. But one thing we have to remember is, what's this going to do to our master sketch, the constraints against our master sketch? Because if I make that constraint now, they're highlighted, like so, and I set that, then we'll create a constraint against those. If we bring back our master sketch constraints, these ones here, press spacebar and hit solve, then we've got a problem, because we've constrained this into this position, but using the master sketch constraints to reset, then they're conflicting with each other because we've locked this in this position here and this is fixed. So we've created this locked constraint here. One way to solve it is just to click on this one and set the fixed position to false and then resolve, and then reset this one, because now we're all in line of constraint. You can see that line has connected up correctly because this slips around, fixing that position between those 2 lines, and we can click on that one and fix position as true. So that's all fine. So when I rotate this now, this disc, because we've got a constraint against those 2, come down and have a look at that constraint. So this tube, there's that axis constraint there on that tube, which we had before, which is here. We've gone and placed a constraint along this one, which is the pivot. And we'll look at this axis constraint, use the magnifying glass there, and you can see that's gone right across there. So when we rotate this now, making sure that these constraints are disabled by shift selection, press the spacebar, clicking on the pivot body, clicking on the move tool and using the rotate, hitting OK. You can see those lines have been separated now. Now watch this flip around when I hit the resolve. Not only has that flipped around to become in line, our piston head has started moving. So if we rotate that even further, hit OK and hit the resolve, that's moved our piston head, and we'll use that in our Python script to control this piston. So we've got our finished assembly. We're now going to rotate this programmatically via some Python code, via scripting, to actually animate the assembly. Now we have to do it via Python code because FreeCAD has a Python interpreter in there, and the only way you can actually record and play animations per se in the A2Plus workbench is via creating some kind of rotation or movement point and manipulating that via script. Now it may sound a bit complex, but to actually get this up and running, it only requires a few lines of code, but a little bit of understanding of how that code works. Lucky enough, FreeCAD has something called the Python console, which is under View, Panels, and Python console. I'm just going to right click and clear this, so we've got a clear Python console. The Python console is the way you actually enter Python commands to manipulate your model. For instance, this disk here we're going to rotate, so we'll actually come in here, write some Python code to rotate this. If I wanted to do this as an animation, then I would actually write a loop which loops around, rotating this by X amount over a certain period of time to create this animation and simulate the scene. The first thing I'm going to do is reset this model. So I'm going to come up to our piston head master sketch, come in and show all of these axis constraints. If you notice down the bottom, there's commands being entered into the Python console. And this is handy when we come to writing scripts because we can actually see what's going on the screen. So if I hit the resolve, you can see I've got a constraint problem. And what I'm going to do is just click on the disk, come down to the fixed position, set that to false, and now do the resolve. We can see a command has been entered down here, which has solved the constraints, and we'll be using this command when it comes to creating our animation. So you can see commands are being pushed to the screen. So you can see the fixed position is set to false here, and this command to solve has been pushed to the screen. I'm going to come back in and make sure that fixed position now is true, and just hide those constraints. Now in the reset position, what we need to do is figure out how to rotate this point here. I'm going to bring this up so we can see the properties here. So we've got the fixed position of true, which is correct. The placement, we need to change the angle in here. Now I've just noticed something. You can see the axis there has changed. So if I try to rotate this angle, this will be rotated along the wrong axis. Let me show you how to do that in code. Let's collapse the piston head, the master sketch there, come down to this body here, which has been clicked on and highlighted, pivot body 001, and right click and send to Python console. What that's done is sent a number of different items to Python console, so you can see object, shape, and element there, ELT. We're interested in just the object. Now, if I click off and click that pivot body again, so the whole lot is highlighted there, and right click, send to Python console, we only get one, which is this one here. What's actually happened, it's taken the element or the object from our document, so this get document, piston assembly demo video 6, and the body 001, this is the internal name for this body, so pivot body 001. If you look down to the left, you can see the internal name sitting there. So actually push that into the Python console, and it's assigned it to something called a variable. OBJ is a variable. You can actually name this what you want. So if I actually typed in here OBJ, press enter, it comes back as a part feature, which this is. So for instance, I could take this whole command, Control C it, and type in here pivot point equals Control V, and hit enter. Now that pivot point is also the part feature, part.part feature, which is exactly the same as the body. And I can test that. Pivot point and put double equals OBJ. That comes back as true. So it's saying that the pivot point, is it equal to the OBJ? Double equals means is it equal? It's a Boolean operation, true or false. We don't have to worry about this because we're not going to be using this. We're just interested in spinning this disk here. So if I come into the pivot point, remembering our axis doesn't look right there, and place a dot, we get a number of different things come up in here. So these are all items, properties, and functions that can be accessed from pivot point. So these are all properties. You can see it says property up there. So if I do pivot point dot placement, you can see we've got a placement there. And if we do a dot, and we haven't got an angle because it's actually under rotation. So I double click that. So we've got pivot point placement dot rotation. If I hit enter, you can see we've got the rotation there. Then press the up arrow again. And if I do dot, and there's the angle there, and that will return a radans value. So this is what this angle is here. So it says 360 here. This is 360 degrees in radans, but you can see that axis is actually off. So although it's placed in degrees, what I can do is go pivot point dot placement dot rotation angle equals, and I'm going to go 5 and hit enter and see what's happened. And that's actually flipped around there. So our axis is off, but we've affected the angle in code. I'm just going to replace that by copying this radan value here, pressing the up arrow to get the last command, and just press Control V in there to paste it in there. Just going to place it back. So I need to sort out this angle in here. Now the easiest way is quite simple. If I click on the pivot body, come up to the move or right click transform, and just move this slightly like so. Hit OK. So I've rotated that along this axis. If we look in here and the placement, the angle and the axis, we can see that's been reset now. And I can hit solve, and that's solved that simulation now. And you can see it's placed a command into the Python GUI. Don't worry if you're getting a bit lost. We're going to go through these commands in a minute when we string them together. So I now know that this last command, I'll just press page up, bear with me. This last command, press up, pivot.placement rotation angle, is what I'll use to move this simulation. So you can see it's moving there. Now I enter, and then I can use this command here, which is the solve command, Control C, Control V, and that solves our animation there. So we've got two commands already to actually move this animation. So we can see how we can venture into the Python and figure out how to move this. What I'm going to do is just take those two, Control C, come up to macros, and we're going to create a macro in here. And I'm going to call this Python Piston Animation. Name doesn't matter, it's whatever name you want to use. I'm just going to Control V that in there. I want to take off these chevrons and these ones as well. And we've got 2 lines of code that actually reset the position of this assembly. So come back in. I'm just going to Control S that to save it. And you can see even the command to save actually gets placed in here. Come back to the assembly demo. And what we're going to do is move this simulation. So I'm going to use the move tool, move the part under rule of constraint, and just move this now. Now I should be moving the rotation wheel. So let's click on this here, right click, transform, and move this somewhere there. OK, hit the solve. That's solved that simulation. If I come out to the macro, this macro here, come out to macro and come down to execute the macro, come back, you can see that's been solved. So running that piece of code has solved and reset our animation. And if we look at this pivot point, come over to the placement and the angle, you can see it's back to 360. And we can see how we can build up our animation. Now we've got 2 lines of code in here. We've got pivot point, .placement, .rotation, .angle, but it's just resetting to 6.2. So what I want to do is actually increase the angle. Now it doesn't matter if it goes beyond 6.2 because you can see our angle is here. If I set this angle to something like 700 and hit the solve, you can see that solved it absolutely fine. So we can go beyond the 360. It just wraps around. So this angle there at the moment is 1700, and if I come down here and go back to the previous command, or stop being lazy and actually type it in here, which was pivot point dot placement dot rotation, capital R rotation dot angle, you can see we've got 29 radians there. So that takes account of how many times that's gone round, and it just calculates the correct position. Absolutely fine. So if that was the case, all we need to do to spin this is increment this by a number. So we add a number to this. So we can come over to the Python console, look at the angle, and instead of running this command, I'm going to use a plus and an equals here, which adds a value to this, and I'm going to put something like 0.5 radians in there. So now when I run this, go to macro, execute macro, that's executed, and we'll do that again, macro, execute macro. This is actually executing. You can see this is moving up, but we can't get to that tab until it's finished. You can see that's moved there. Reason being is this is blocking something called blocking GUI. So the user interface of FreeCAD, this is blocking it. All we need to do in here is run a command called GUI dot update GUI, and that will allow any pulled commands to actually update. So I'm going to copy that and place that in here. Now when we go macro, execute macro, we still get the blocking, but it allows us to actually run this and have the GUI released after our commands. So when we run this, what will happen is the pivot will take place, the GUI run command solver will take place, and then the GUI will be updated to allow those to actually run, and the command will be executed. We need to run this over and over again, because at the moment we're just coming out to macro, execute macro, going over to our tab, and you can see the angle has been updated each time. So to do that, I'm going to use something called a loop. So we have our pivot point all set up. But one thing is, if we close out of this and come back the next day, or just reopen FreeCAD, we're going to have a problem here because this is not actually defined. We need to define this. Before we had it defined down here, and this was running perfectly. But say if it's a new day and we're coming back to our project, then this is not defined when we open up a project. To define it, we use a command. I'm going to use it down here called FreeCAD. And what this does, it allows access to the active document. So the active document is this document here. So if this name changes, it doesn't matter. So if I use active document in there and just hit the dot, we can see we've got body 001 and the rest. And this one here is the pivot point that we want to use, this one here. You can look down to the bottom left, you see the body 001 underscore 002 is that pivot point. That's an internal name. So what I'm going to do in here is use doc equals and the FreeCAD.active document. That signs up that to that. And also we want to create the pivot point, and that equals, because doc has been assigned to FreeCAD.active document, so we've got doc there, dot, and if we come in here, dot, and we want this one here, body 001 underscore 002. So that's assigned up pivot point to that now. Remember we had problems with the rotation, so we've got the pivot point placement dot rotation dot angle, but our axis was incorrect. So we come back to these here and press the space bar to activate the master sketch constraints and use the Rubik's Cube to solve that. And then we come down to our pivot body, come up to the axis. We can see our axis is not correct. When we come in and transform that, let's make sure that our piston head master sketch, all of these, press the space bar on that to deactivate that constraint because we don't need them anymore. If we right click, transform and rotate that slightly and hit OK, we can now see with the placement of the pivot body that the axis is now correct. So X, Z and Y. So we need to use that. This is a vector. So we come into here and we'll do the pivot body, the placement dot rotation, and in here's an axis. So we're setting it all up first. Dot axis. And we make that equals to FreeCAD dot. Now if I do it down here, FreeCAD dot, I believe it's vector. There we go. Roll over that, we can see that's a class representing a 3D float vector. So in here we do vector, and then in brackets we add the x, which is, it says -0 there. So 0, 1 and 0. So we've reset the axis, we've done the placement, and we should be all ready to go. So the document equals the FreeCAD active document, the pivot point is set up, and then we reset the axis and we plus equals the angle to 5. Let's have a look, see what we get. So we're set there. Macro, execute macro. See that's run, and we can see this starting to move. Macro, execute macro, Control F6, and see this is moving. I'm just pressing Control F6 now, and this is all working. So we've created our macro, we reset the pivot point, and each time we run this, it moves our assembly. Remember, to reset, we need to take this point here, our pivot point, set it to false, come down, fixed position, false. And if you look at the commands down here, we could actually create a macro to actually do this. Come up to the top, piston and master sketch, select all of those, press the space bar. So we've toggled the visibility of those. So those are now active. We hit the resolve. That resolves it, and then we make sure that the fixed position is true and our master sketch constraints, which we just use for alignment, press the spacebar and they're set to off or hidden. So we've got our macro. We need to run this in a continuous loop, or a loop that we can stop, preferably a loop that we can stop. To do that, I'm going to make use of something called a while loop. So a while loop, just the words while, allows you to run this over and over again until a certain condition is met. I don't need to run this dock and the pivot point instantiation, in other words, the creation of those two variables inside the while loop. Once they're created, then the loop can commence. So we type in while. Now we need some kind of condition. So we need to say while something is true or something is false, then loop through this. Then when that condition changes, then this will exit. This will no longer be true or false, and it'll come out. Now I've said before that we wasn't going to use the double equals. We wasn't going to go into this, but we actually are. So the double equals means if something is true. So first of all, we need to find something that we can set to true or to a value. I'm going to use this doc. So we signed up doc, which remember is the FreeCAD active document. Now if I go out to the document, which is this one, if I type in FreeCAD.active document and then put a dot in there, let's have a look for comment. So we've got a comment there. If we move up, we've got a comment field here. So I'm going to say, if there's something in this comment, then we're going to stop the animation. So if I hit enter now, at the moment, it just equals these two quotes, which means nothing in there. So if I do comment equals, and we use double quotes or single quotes, doesn't really matter, and we'll put a Q in there, that equals false. So if there's nothing in there, that will equal true. So we're going to use that in our macro. So while comment, this FreeCAD comment equals nothing or a blank string, colon, and then we'll tab these inwards. This means that anything in these tabs will be executed. So what we're doing is we're resetting this axis, which I don't want to do. I'm going to Control X that and put it above. I only want to do that once. We don't need to do it again. Each command burns some processing time. So the less processing time we burn, the better our animation will be. So we've got this document equals FreeCAD.active document. The pivot points are set up. The pivot points are zeroed for the axis. So it's around the right axis. We then repeat until the comment doesn't equal nothing. So if there's R, Q, and A in there, or whatever you want to put in there, that will actually quit the animation. While it's running, we increment the angle by 0.5 radians. We run the solver and we update the GUI. So we'll run this now. Come up to macro, execute macro. This is running. Let's come over and we can see that our animation is running. I'm on a very slow computer, so this is actually going quite slow for me. My computer is around 2018, something like that, even before. So this is going quite slowly. So come back, so this is running. If I come over to the comment now, click on the comment and put something in here, this animation has stopped. And the whole macro has now exited. It's come out the bottom because it can't do anything else. It's fallen out the bottom and our macro has stopped. So we've actually produced an animation. This is quite an effective way of doing animation. This is just a quick way. What I will do is run this from something called a timer loop. I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to supply the code for that. So I'm going to do it in such a way that it's documented and you can swap in your document name. Well, we'll use active document. We'll swap in the pivot point So you'll be able to assign it in there and run this animation. So we'll set the angle in there as well, how many degrees that you want to rotate. So I'll create that macro for you and you can use that in your animations. There is videos on my channel explaining the time macro and how to use it and even how to use it from a GUI. So if you want to go onto my channel and look at that a bit deeper, you can. But for the time, we're going to be using this macro and I'll be supplying the macro for the timer loop to make that more efficient. If you want this macro, please look at the description of this video and you'll find a link to the macro there. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to the site. I also have a Ko-Fi or a coffee site that you can donate to if you so desire, and that's at ko-fi.com/MANG0. I also run a Patreon where you can subscribe and get extra content, and that's at www.patreon.com/MangoJellySolutions. Any money that's kindly donated will be used to expand the channel. Thanks a lot for watching and subscribing, and I'll see you again soon.